Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. We're going to continue looking at the chronology of the decrees from the book of Ezra. But before we do that, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful once again to be here studying your word. We're thankful for each person that's here, that watches the videos as well, and those that are searching for truth, seeking to be corrected and brought into alignment with truth. We ask, Lord, that as we look at these things in Ezra, that you can guide and direct, that your Holy Spirit can speak to us, and that you can bring a power and conviction to our lives. Pray for a blessing upon each person who is studying these things. Give us a clear understanding, an understanding mind, and a receptive heart. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning again, everyone. Now, I have a new setup, so it's a little bit weird how I'm doing things. Now, of course, you can't see, but I'm back to 3 computer screens instead of 4 like I was yesterday. It was really confusing, but it's just I've changed a little bit how I do things. So the one computer which seems to shut off every once in a while, if it shuts off, we'll still be connected, because the main computer is this new one and should work okay. But the one that I share from, 2 screens that share my screens, that's the one that shuts off. So all that would happen is what I'm sharing on the screen would disappear. Now, we have been looking at well, there's a couple of points, so some loose ends. I did a little bit of looking into prophets and kings. So Ellen White had worked on prophets and kings. So initially, this was a book that she was getting prepared before she died. And it's going to be Clarence C. Chrysler who ends up putting the book together. I know I've heard his name before. I don't know much about it. But basically, he was working with Ellen White as the editor at the time. And he compiled this under Ellen White's direction from all these different articles. Now, he did add materials from some of her letters, but most is taken from Review and Herald, Signs of the Times, Youth Instructor, and Southern Watchman, I think. That these are basically articles that Ellen White was writing in preparation for this book. There's also materials from the Spirit of Prophecy series. I can't remember which volume it is, but originally Ellen White had a writing of the Great Controversy or the Conflict of the Ages in this series, the 4-volume Spirit of Prophecy, or Great was it called Great? Can't remember what it was called. Is it called Spirit of Prophecy or Great Controversy? I'm not sure why. I think it was called. What's the 4-volume thing called that she originally had? I think it's called the Great Controversy.
No, Spirit of Prophecy.
Spirit of Prophecy? Okay. Just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, yeah, so the Spirit of Prophecy, the 4 volumes. So it's from one of those volumes that she, so the Spirit of Prophecy, volume 4, isn't that the first edition of the Great Controversy?
Technically.
Okay, yeah, so the 1884 Great Controversy, right? Is that the same
No, the
thing?
Spirit of Prophecy was written years before that, and then you had the Great Controversy coming out in multiple editions.
Okay.
Multiple years.
Yeah, okay. So, but you have, I'm trying to remember, I've read all these books many times, but trying to remember all the different titles and what's in them. Yeah, because you have the 1884 Great Controversy, the 1888, and the 1911, right? But the 1888 and
1884, 1888, 1911, I think are correct.
Yeah, but the 1884 is quite a bit smaller. The 1888 and 1911 are pretty much the same.
Right.
Okay, now I get that straight. Okay, so anyway, so people become picky about, did Ellen White actually say certain things? Now, the points that we've looked at and that we're going to look at, we have this interpretation of where it talks about in the reign of Ahasuerus at the beginning of his reign, Ellen White says that that is Cambyses. And then we'll have to look where she talks about Artaxerxes in verse 7 as being false Smyrtus. Or maybe we looked at the false Smyrtus one first. We didn't look at the Cambyses one. So we have to see if she actually said that someplace other than Prophets and Kings. Then there's statements where she makes about the more than 20 years and the less than 20 years, though she doesn't use the word less than. I think she uses nearly 20 years or something like that. So we'll look at that between the two decrees. And then the other thing that we're going to look at is the sort of surface interpretation that's made, I think, by many Adventists regarding who Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes are. That is, they see the name Ahasuerus, that must be the Ahasuerus of Esther. They see Artaxerxes, that must be the Artaxerxes of the decree, right, of the third decree. And then when they see Darius, and it's kind of strange, because if you go here, because I think all of us are really familiar with how we look at things, but they would see here, Darius, the son of Ahasuerus. Well, that would be, like if you take Ahasuerus as being Xerxes, you would have a real problem here with Daniel chapter 9, right? So obviously you can see the name Ahasuerus, which is a title, can refer to different people, right? So it would make no sense if we thought this Ahasuerus was Xerxes, right? Because then you would have had this happen, before the 70 years are ended, because Daniel's praying about the 70 years.
Okay.
So there are some people, when they read these things, and you might call them literalists, but they don't really use history. They don't really put everything together. They have an idea in their mind about these names, and they don't really think it all through. And so you end up with these strange interpretations. And as I said yesterday, I had a discussion on Facebook with a person who was arguing that in Ezra chapter 4, that what you have is the enemies from the days of Cyrus until the reign of Darius, and then after Darius you're going to have Ahasuerus, which they're going to take as Xerxes, and then they're going to have Artaxerxes. And so they're going to take these oppositions that are happening here in chapter 4, verse 7 onward. They're going to take that as happening at the time that, of the decree of Artaxerxes. So they're going to put this later into Artaxerxes' reign, not taking it as false Smyrtus, who only reigned for 7 months, right? So, and as I said before, maybe it wasn't fair, but, the guy was pretty upset with me. I think I saved the conversation somewhere. I think I put it into a file. I'm not 100% certain, because I know I ended up communicating with him through Messenger, just because it was so volatile on, the Facebook chat where we were at. And he was an older Adventist, so I had the impression he was probably in his 80s. So he was sort of well entrenched in this view, and he had started a vehement attack against me on Facebook. My character and everything, it was all being attacked. I was some kind of, new theology guy or something. It was kind of strange, but I understood what he was saying. I understood why people would look at that and have the temple being constructed by 408. So a common view that Adventists have when we go to Daniel chapter 9, so it's here again, not to the beginning, here to the end. So when they talk about the 70 weeks, you'll see this view about the streets and the walls, right? So you're going to have, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build to Jerusalem. So they're going to take that as Artaxerxes' decree. Now we know that it's a little more complicated than that. that the going forth is when they leave Babylon, the commandment to restore. So it's the going forth of the commandment. And then the restore, or the return of the people under that decree of Artaxerxes. And then the to build. So there's this three-step process in 457 BC. But we've always read this as just the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. And so we just sort of look at this as one event. There's the going forth of the commandment. And then most Adventists will have the going forth of the commandment in the fall of 457. But the commandment goes forth in the spring, right? So this is about the journey of Ezra from Babylon to Jerusalem, and then the setting up of the administration and so forth. So, and we will go over all of that again. We've gone through it before, but we're going to look at it all again and see if there's things that we have missed. So then there shall be 7 weeks. So the 7 weeks is the 49 years from 457 BC to 408. And so that 49 years, what people will often believe in reading this is that's going to be the time to build the temple, right? And it says, and 62 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Now we know during that 7 weeks that the street being built again and the wall, that's going to be under the second decree of Artaxerxes, what we often call Nehemiah's decree. So, but they take that as the temple. This is about a commandment to build the temple. But we know there's really nothing in here in Artaxerxes' decree, when we look at it in Ezra 7, that has anything to do with building the temple, because the temple has already been built long before, right? So basically 60 years before the temple has been built, in 58. So it's dedicated in 515, so that 58 years later, you're going to have Artaxerxes' decree. But most Adventists, at least ones that I've talked to in the past, and I know I didn't understand this, I just assumed that this is the building of the temple under Artaxerxes' decree. And so we would just look for Artaxerxes' decree. We wouldn't really talk about Darius' decree. Cyrus's decree, which he does actually instruct them to build the temple and to return to the land, we sort of brush aside because it's just not at the right time. But Cyrus's, Darius, and Artaxerxes' decree, all 3 decrees are needed, as we will see, to meet the specifications of the prophecy. So this was, for me, when I started understanding this history. The first thing is I was shocked at how little I understood about it as a Seventh-day Adventist. That is, of all the books that I had read, all the commentaries and studies on Daniel's prophecy, the 70 weeks and the 2300 days, went through God's Cares, volume 1 and 2, I've read all these different commentaries on Daniel and Revelation, that I was so totally ignorant of this history. I realized it was just basically a disease I inherited when I became an Adventist. So I somehow caught that disease. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think that Seventh-day Adventists, even ones who study the prophecies, have so little understanding of this history that we see in the book of Ezra? What is that? What's going on? Because it seems to me like a kind of blindness.
Have we become myopic that we think we understand everything with Daniel and Revelation, and that Ezra can just be set aside?
Yeah, well, that at least would apply to me, because I used to think that I knew quite a bit. But there was all of these pieces missing, and for some reason, it's like when you read something and you don't know what you're looking for, you don't see it, right? You don't see what you don't see.
Well, on Sabbath afternoon, Jennifer and I, along with another friend, went up to another meeting. And in the drive to those meetings, we had several conversations. Now, when we came back, we began a conversation about the daily. And it was shocking to this other friend to have to consider that the daily, as it is presented, is not Christ's ministry on our behalf. They had to really stretch to understand that the daily was paganism and that the abomination that makes desolate is papalism.
Mm-hmm.
But when you take those 3 verses in Daniel that address the daily, you're able to show very clearly that this daily that is being presented cannot be Christ's ministry.
Well, when, this has to do with how people, either it's a type of compartmentalization, or it's just really, maybe it's a type of, cognitive bias of some sort. But if you were just reading Daniel chapter 8, and you had the interpretation that it's Christ's heavenly ministry, and you're focused upon talking about the sanctuary, and you don't know about Adventist history, I could kind of see how you could slip that under somebody's, door, and they're going to just accept it. But when you look at Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12 verse 11, it seems pretty clear that this can't be Christ's ministry that's being talked about.
And that was exactly the point that was being made.
Yeah. Now, I remember when I first heard about the true view of the daily, the correct view of the daily, the argument that was being presented, because it was in 2007, and it had to do with stuff in the Sabbath school. It's a long story, but a friend of mine who was engaged had ended up breaking up his engagement because he was on the side I was on, and his fiance was on the correct view of the daily. It's kind of sad in a way. I mean, there's probably obviously other factors involved, but the issue, like it was, I could not comprehend the issue about the daily, because to me it was just about Ellen White's statements that this is not to be a conversation that we're supposed to have, and yet the one side has the conversation but won't let the other side have the conversation, right? It's like, it's not an important issue, but our view is correct, and so you guys who are trying to tell us about the pioneer understanding, that's obviously not correct. But that was the kind of thinking at the time, and I was caught up in that thinking, in that paradigm.
Right.
And so it took me, it wasn't until 2010 and 11 when I started studying this message that I really spent the time to read what the daily was from the pioneers' writings, from Millwright writings. And then it just became really evident that even though I don't think they quite get everything right as far as the timelines and so forth, because they don't, they don't really deal with 723 and so forth in the 1260s, but not in the same way they do. But yeah, so there is a kind of, I can think about it as a sort of blindness. Now there is some, ego involved. I can see that in myself back then. Hopefully I'm free of that now. But back then it was, how can somebody tell me that I don't understand this? Even though in the back of my mind, I knew there was a problem with Christ's heavenly ministry in Daniel chapter 8, in that interpretation, because it didn't make sense with the 2300-day timeline, right? Because it's talking about the 2300 days. So because I didn't understand the 2020 back in 2007, it really, initially it was just, a matter of blindness. But once I had opened up, to being corrected with the 2520, and that took a while, right? So, I mean, I heard about it in the summer of 2010, fall of 2010, when Dwayne Lemon, preached against it at our convocation in Warburg. But, and then I started looking at it. I just started reading the pioneers' writings. Then when I went to Oklahoma in November, they didn't really talk about it in any detailed way. They mentioned the 2520, but they never really did any studies on it on the camp meeting. As I spent time understanding the 2520, then it all fell into place. But when it comes to this history, then the history of Ezra, it was kind of a mystery. That is, I could read the book of Ezra and I could read prophets and kings and not understand anything that I'm reading. Right? And that to me is a type of blindness, because generally when I read, I understand what I read. But I could read through prophets and kings, dozens of times and not understand the history she just described. And so that must be a spiritual, like a supernatural type of blindness. Like, it's not normal blindness, right? It's not just, cognitive bias. It's not just that, somebody has started down a path and they have to continue on this path. It's like the hand being held over the mistake on the 1843 charts types of blindness. But would you guys agree with me on that? That there's something that it was withheld from us for a time, for some reason. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that means it was then unsealed, right? Because it was sealed up is my argument. Is that, because I'm not saying that, it was, an egotist or anything, but there is part of the ego involved when we can't see something that's right in front of our eyes. There's part of that. So,
cool.
But there is also the fact that even though I was trying to understand things, until the time that we are to have that unsealed, it's going to be sealed, right? We're not going to be able to see it unless we're, chosen by God, to see it, like Jeff was, right? So we have this understanding that unfolds. Now this brings in a question regarding light, because we know this is true in the past. We know the Millerites, there were things they did not see. We know there's things the disciples did not see. So that means that God then must unfold light, reveal light at the appropriate time, which would mean that it's possible there are things that we cannot see that are right under our noses, but we will see when the time is right. And I think even about, when Stephen noticed the 777 years from 457 to 321 to the Sunday, and that he didn't notice that till December 25th, 2021, right? To the end of our 777 days, he's going to notice the 777 years, which we should have easily noticed, but God reveals things at the right time. And so what is our responsibility in that regard? What is it that we need to do to receive the light at the right time? It is a rather broad question, but there are some specific things that I think we need to take into account. So any thoughts on that?
Wouldn't we need to step out in faith in these situations?
Right. So one is there's a faith aspect. So if we're going to apply Miller's rules, there is that last rule: you must have faith, which means walking in the light as the light unfolds, right?
Agreed.
But is there something about setting things on a line and understanding where you are in a line that helps as that line unfolds? That is, if I'm not understanding the progression of how light is unfolding, is if I'm not really paying attention to that. Like, some people, they're just going to focus upon devotional type of Christianity. Right? They're not going to be looking at prophecy. Or if they are looking at prophecy, it's going to be all this speculative type of prophecy. But there's a way of understanding line upon line where we see that, the precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little, is actually mapping out where we are in the line. It's like in my Bible in Revelation, there's some place in Revelation 6, I think, where I write, you are here. Sort of like on a map, when you go to the mall or something, and it tells you where you are in the mall, you're here. I think that we need to be able to look at the lines and know we are here, that we're in this certain point of the line, and to understand that that line as it's unfolding, because as we pass over the ground of fulfilled prophecy, the events that are unfolding will shine back upon the past and then reflect light on past events. And these are going to shine forward upon our path, giving light for our feet. Now, thinking a bit about this in the context of, Stephen's presentation. Now, Stephen did a good presentation. He presents a lot of facts, a lot of information. It's not really, framed in a way that you can understand everything that's happening. But he did, go through this part dealing with the third year of Cyrus, and which I think was helpful, having his presentation on that. And then he went through a lot of mathematical things, dealing with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So, Bereshit bara Elohim haaretz v'haaretz, right? Hashemayim. Let me see, how's it go? Anyway, you know the verse. And we looked at the gematria of it. So we had, what was the number? 2,701? Something like that. I don't even remember the number. What it all added up to. I think maybe it was 4,701, if anybody remembers. But, he took this number and he connected it to 2520, right? So I guess that would be 2,701. That would make sense. So he's going to go from 677 to the year 2520, or 2025, pardon me. And he's going to have this project 2025 and the project 2520, right? So that's how it went. Okay, so from 677, you're going to have 2,701 years. That's going to be the gematria of that verse. So we showed how the 2520 and 2025 are related. Now, the thing about it, though, is there was two different points. So one was dealing with to anoint the most holy. So Stephen and I have a different understanding of Daniel chapter 9, of the 6 things that are mentioned, to make an end to sin, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So we have a different interpretation of how to understand that. So we never have spent much time studying that together. But the anointing of the most holy, it's Kodesh HaKodeshim, which is either a reference to the most holy place in the earthly sanctuary or to the heavenly sanctuary itself. And the way that I would understand that verse is that's referring to Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit's poured out on the day of Pentecost. Also, Ellen White says that's the inauguration of Christ's ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. So I connect that, the anointing of the most holy. Now, often Adventists will just connect that to the baptism of Christ, because that word anoint is Mashiach. So they'll say that that's what it's referring to. Now there is some ways in which that is connected. So the baptism of Christ is obviously connected to his preparation to be both the priest and the sacrifice, and also, the king as well. So all of those anointings are all part of it. But so I think it's quite important when Stephen's using these Protestant commentaries and some of their opinions to recognize there are things that they don't understand. Commentaries can be useful because they can give us background information. They can refer us to other verses, but often their interpretations can be wrong. And we can't really speculate as well. So the other thing was dealing with what it means with the project 2025, because we know that most Adventists are looking at, Trump's presidency is the one who's going to bring in the Sunday law. But we see Trump as a type of Cyrus. And so if we're going to deal with the 2520 and we're going to connect it to the decrees, right, that is in Daniel chapter 9, those decrees, Cyrus's decree, Darius's decree, and Artaxerxes' decree, Are those positive things for God's people or negative things for God's people? We would have to say they're positive, right? So to sort of take that and then apply it to the Sunday law per se, right, which is what people would do with what Stephen wasn't really doing that, but people would do that with it. They would see, oh, this just affirms the idea that Trump's going to bring in the Sunday law, instead of recognizing that this is the opportunity for God's people to return back to the foundational truths, and also for Americans to turn back to God. That opportunity is being offered. And what we see in the media, the opposition, to Charlie Kirk, the type of hatred, even within the right and even within the Christian right, the people who profess to be Christians, believing that Charlie Kirk was either assassinated by Mossad or by, his wife was involved somehow, it has to do with Israel. All of these crazy ideas are really an attack upon this reform, right? That God has offered America and the world to turn back to God prior to the Sunday law. So obviously it is connected to the Sunday law, right? But not in the direct way that people are looking at it. So anyway, that I know that's somewhat out of the scope of these studies in what we're studying, just particularly the chronology, but those are the important context in which to understand what we're studying, why we're studying this, and why it's being understood now. So just another little review. I have this chart that I started drawing out. It's not completed yet, but we're going to put on this chart some more dates and spans of time, right? So we have this work that Solomon's going to do in laying the foundation of the temple, right? And then we're going to connect that to the laying of the foundation of the temple in this history, which is going to be here, but you're going to have the laying of the foundation of the temple here. And then we're going to have the temple completed. So we're going to have another chart like this. We're going to deal with, I think it's going to go to this date. And that's going to be not between the laying of the foundation of the temple, but that's going to be about the completion of the temple. So the temple is completed in 606, or 10,006, 606, right? And there's going to be a dedication here of the temple, which is going to be connected to the dedication of the temple in 515. That's not what I this. Okay, so we're gonna end up doing that, and then here we have this. So April 23rd. That's going to be the 24th day of the first month. That's the end of Daniel's 21 days of prayer. And then there's 154 days to the altar being set up on the first day of the seventh month. So we're going to take this. So we're going to have 24th day of the first month, right? And then this is going to be the first day of the seventh month. So this 154 days becomes a symbol because 154 is 2 times 77. It's the inclusive number of days in Samuel Snow's letters. It's part of our history from June 9th, 2018 to October 13th, 2018. It's 100. Is it there? I don't remember. No, that's 126 days. So there's 154 days somewhere in there. I'm trying to remember where it is. Okay, and then you have 391. So the 391, we understand 391 years. Josiah, which is prophecy of Ezekiel based on the prophecy of Josiah. It's 391 and a half. Now here we actually have May 19th or May 20th, depending which calendar we're using, or depending if we're counting on the first day of the second month or the second day of the second month. So either way, we get 391 and a half as a symbol. We just put 391 days between these two dates, September 24th, 536, and May 19th, 536. 535. I didn't change that there. So we get 391. Does that make sense? That doesn't really make sense. No, the 391 is not between here. The 391 is between here. There's, right. So now, there's the 391. That makes more sense. Not sure why it's not working properly. I'll just put it up above it. I'll figure that out later. So we got the 391 and the 154. So I think I put the 154 on the right side.
Did you mean October 13th, 537, or did you mean October 13th, 539?
Oh, yes. So this, okay. So, this isn't October 13th. This is just the fall. That's what happens when I use other diagrams and then I copy and paste and I end up with all these things. So the fall of 537. So we don't know the exact date that Cyrus comes to the throne. We know that it's within about 2 years of the fall of Babylon. So I could put the fall of Babylon and the fall of Assyria in here as well. So you got the fall of Assyria in October of 609, and then you're going to have which Babylon rises, so the 70 years for them. Okay, thanks for noticing my mistakes. I appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, so you're going to have between September 24th, 536, and May 19th, 535, 237 days. Right, so I could put that in there. And you can see if you add them together, you get 391. Okay, so we had worked that out. Now we're going to look at these decrees themselves. So when we deal with, I'm going to go to one of my charts here. So here's a chart that I made a long time ago, dealing with how I looked at some of this chronology. So hopefully you can see that well. What is this for me? Okay. So there's the fall of Babylon, fall of 539. Then you have within about 2 years, you're going to have the accession of Cyrus. So he's going to be, now back when I did this, I didn't quite understand as much as we do now. So when we have the fall of Babylon, Darius the Mede, who's also called Cyaxares II, if I pronounced that correctly, he becomes king of lands, and Cyrus is king of Babylon. So Cyrus is king of Babylon for this period from the fall of Babylon to the completion of the 70 years. When he becomes king over all of the realm, he gets the title king of lands. And his son Cambyses, for 9 months, is going to be the king of Babylon. But something happens that he no longer is the king of Babylon. So he's co-reigning with Cyrus as taking this title king of Babylon. So he sort of takes his dad's place in Babylon for a period of time. So there's some reason they were unhappy about his role there as the religious leader, that's part of his role as king of Babylon. And then we're going to see we got Cyrus's decree, and that's going to be roughly 6 months after Cyrus ascends to the throne. And so we spent a bit of time looking at this struggle, and Stephen did, dealing with showing that according to the spirit of prophecy, contrary to many other people's opinions, that Daniel chapter 10 is referring to this period of time in where the decree is going to be given, not 2 years later in the 3rd year of Cyrus. So you can see the 3rd year of Cyrus, if you're counting as Cyrus being the king over all the lands, that is, he has that whole kingdom, and that's in the Babylonian records. They're going to count his reign in the same way that as Ezra does in Ezra chapter 1, where they talk about 536 as the 1st year of Cyrus. Okay. Then I have on the top there in chapter 3, verse 1 and 6, the first day of the seventh month. That's in 536. They're going to set up the altar. And then I have the second month, second year. We're assuming, as many people do, that it's going to be the second month, the second year, the second day that they lay the foundation of the temple. But it's either the first day or the second day of the second month that the foundation of the second temple is laid. So most people say it's the second day of the second month, but the Bible doesn't explicitly say it's the second day. They just say when the second month was come, right? So that would usually refer to the first day of the second month, except that they say that they're going to lay the foundation of the temple on the same date that it was laid by Solomon with the first temple. So he's going to lay the foundation on the second day of the second month. And so they think that they're repeating the history of Solomon. Okay. And then we're going to have the death of Cyrus here. You can see in Cambyses then is going to reign. So Cyrus's death happens somewhere I think they say that it's going to happen like in 530, right at the end of the year. And so just when 529 is going to start, Cambyses reigns. His reign begins in the spring of 529. That's his first year count. And then Cambyses is going to die. And there's going to be this revolt where false Smerdis claims to be heir to the throne, but he's an imposter. And he's going to reign for 7 months. And then he's going to be assassinated by Darius the Great, Darius Hystaspes. And his accession is going to happen on the 10th day of the 7th month on the biblical calendar. So he's going to begin on the Day of Atonement, his reign. And what people will do with Darius's reign and the start of the rebuilding of the temple again. So it's going to stop under false Smerdis, right? During that 7 months, they're going to stop because they've had this opposition all the way through. They start looking at, building their own houses and so forth instead of the temple. And so with false Smerdis, there's going to be this opposition, which we're just going to read about here. We did read about it, but we're going to look at it again. Then we'll see that it's going to take time. It's going to be the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah that are going to be necessary to commence the rebuilding of the temple. So I think what people do is they don't start it in 522. I think they started in 520. So they're going to say in 520 they begin rebuilding the temple. The problem there is Haggai and Zechariah begin prophesying in 520, but it's still going to take time. And then what we say is that the opposition that's going to happen in Ezra 4 verse 7, and which is going to be false Smerdis, and then there's going to be, again, we'll go through and read that. We're going to see this opposition and how it unfolds, and then finally Darius is going to issue his decree, and we'll see how that relates to the completion of the temple, and then the temple dedication. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of the history that we're studying right now. Okay, so hopefully that helps a bit. So we have here again, in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, verse 6 of Ezra 4, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So Ahasuerus is Cambyses. So he's reigning from 529 to 522. So you have this opposition that's going on. It began when the Samaritans are going to want to be involved in building the temple, and the Jews say, no, you guys don't have anything to do with it. And so it's continuing through all that from the days of Cyrus all the way to the reign of Darius. Now, in the reign of Ahasuerus, he's before Darius, not after, right? Because this is not Xerxes, this is false Smerdis. And then, or Cambyses, pardon me. And then false Smerdis is in Ezra 4:7. In the day of Artaxerxes, that's going to be false Smerdis. Now, we read the statement in the Spirit of Prophecy that applied this to false Smyrtus. So I'm going to show you this again. So when Ellen White addresses Smyrtus in Prophets and Kings, it's going to say, during the reign of Cambyses, the work of the temple progressed slowly, and during the reign of false Smyrtus, called Artaxerxes in Ezra 4, verse 7, the Samaritans induced the unscrupulous impostor to issue a decree forbidding the Jews to rebuild their temple and city. Now, I mistakenly said that Prophets and Kings was written during Ellen White's lifetime. That was written, but it was published posthumously. So it's partly Ellen White was involved in putting the book together at the beginning, but she ended up dying before the book was completed. And it was mostly articles that she had written in Review and Herald, Signs of the Times, etc. Right? And some letters and manuscripts. So I got that wrong, and so Dwight pointed out that that was wrong. Now we have in the STA Bible commentary from manuscript 116, 1897, where Ellen White says, the Samaritans tried to hinder the work, but by their false reports, they aroused suspicion in minds easily stirred up to suspect. And because of this discouragement, the Jews became unbelieving and indifferent in regard to the work that the Lord had signified he would have done. They were opposed by Smyrtus, the usurper. They ceased the work of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. So it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So what people say is, based on this Bible verse, which is that it's, and we'll look at this, that into the second year. So they'll just say that means Darius's decree must be in the second year. But we'll see that it's in his sixth year that he makes the decree. So there's this period of time when they start to rebuild under the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah, but it's still a slow process. And then once they start to build, then they have opposition again, and then that opposition. So we'll look at all of that. Ellen White tells us quite clearly about the space between the decrees, so we'll have to look at her statements there. Now we have the Review and Herald article from December 5th, 1907. During the reign of Cambyses, the work of the temple progressed very slowly. Finally, in the brief reign of the false Smyrtus, named Artaxerxes in Ezra 4, verse 7, the Samaritans induced the unscrupulous impostor to issue a decree forbidding the Jews to build their temple and city. So we can see that we have the Review and Herald one and the manuscript. So there's only places she mentions Smyrtus. Specifically, other places are just either going to quote those, or we have a rewriting of sort of in Prophets and Kings. Just the sentence is a little bit different, but it says the same thing. So we got Cambyses, and then so I'm going to search for this. I know you're just looking at the Bible. You're not looking at what I'm doing. I'm just going to look at all the places she talks about Cambyses. There's 11 places. So again, it's in Prophets and Kings. Yeah, so she mentions about his reign at 7.5 years. Okay, so it's just going to be the same quotes when she mentions Cambyses, basically. She says, in the Review and Herald article, December 5th, 1907, the victory was finally gained and the forces of the enemy were held in check all the days of Cyrus, who reigned for 7 years, and all the days of his son Cambyses, who reigned about 7.5 years. Now, when we think about this then, so I'm just going to go back to this chart. So just looking at this in different ways. So when she says that Cyrus reigns for 7 years, you can see that that's counting from 536 to 530, 529. So he dies in the 7th year of his reign as king of lands. right? But that's not the same as when Daniel talks about the third year of Cyrus. He's not talking about this reign. He's talking about the third year in the sense of being the king of Babylon, right? So even though he's also, we could say, his son Cambyses is technically king of Babylon once Cyrus becomes king of lands. Daniel's still looking at it from him becoming king of Babylon, right? So the third year. So that third year is the first year. And that's what confuses people. So we have that. And then we have the 7.5 years. So you can see here that I have 8 years, right? But the death of Cambyses is going to be very early in his 8th year because for 7 months, Falsmurtus reigns, and it's going to be on the 10th day of the 7th month. So you can see that brings us right back to the beginning of the year. So probably should have this arrow moved over a little bit in years. You got the death of Cambyses here right at the turn of the year. So in the spring of 522, and then for 7 months he reigns, and then Darius succeeds to the throne, and he reigns for a lot longer. But that's the 7.5 years. But you can see it's in the 8th year of his reign, or at the end of the 7th year, that he's going to die. Somewhere in there. I can't remember the exact date he dies. I'd have to look it up. Okay? That makes sense? So Ellen White gets this information correct. Yeah, so again, she mentioned, so these Cambyses, Smyrtus, it's basically 2 sources. The December 5th, 1907 Review and Herald article, and the 1897 manuscript 116 or letter 116. Anyway, where she mentions Falsmurtus and Cambyses. Okay. So she understands that history. She doesn't write an immense amount about it. So when we go back to this text, according to the spirit of prophecy, and really according to history and logic, you wouldn't try to, you can't take Artaxerxes here to be Artaxerxes Longimanus, right? It is Falsmurtus, and Ahasuerus here can't be Xerxes. It has to be a Cambyses. So in the days of Falsmurtus, right, Artaxerxes wrote Bishlam, Mithridath, and Tabeel, and the rest of the of their companions, unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the writing of the letter was written in the Syrian tongue, that is Aramaic. If you look up the word, it's going to say Artapashanta. Title rather than, okay, that's Artaxerxes. Okay, here's what I'm looking for. Aramaic, right? Armenian. So that's the language there. Okay. So that's going to be in the Persian tongue, Syrian tongue, probably, which is Aramaic, and interpreted in the Syrian language. Now, just again, that's just the same word, Syrian. Rehum the chancellor and Shimshai the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, king, in this sort. So this is a letter written to Falsmurtus. Then wrote Rehum the chancellor and Shimshai the scribe and the rest of their companions and the Dinanites, and I mention all these names, and the rest of the nation whom the great noble Asnapper, so we're going to say that's Ashurbanipal, who's the son of Esarhaddon, right? So mentions Esarhaddon when they're laying the foundation of the temple. Here they're going to talk about his son Ashurbanipal, who also brought people and put them in the cities of Samaria. This is obviously going to be quite a bit later. And the rest that are on this side of the river, and at such a time, this is the copy of the letter that they sent unto him, even unto Artaxerxes or Falsmurtus the king, thy servants the men on this side the river, and at such a time. Be it known unto the king that the Jews which came up from thee to us are come unto Jerusalem, building the rebellious and the bad city, and have set up walls thereof, and joined foundations. Be it known now unto the king that if this city be builded, and the wall set up again, then will they not pay toll and tribute, and then will they not pay toll and tribute and custom, and so thou shalt endamage the revenue of the king. So he's saying they're not going to pay toll, tribute, and custom to various taxes. Now, because we have maintenance from the king's palace, and it was not meet for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore have we sent and certified the king, that search may be made in the book of the records of thy fathers, so shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city and hurtful unto the kings and provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city destroyed. We certify the king that if this city be builded again, and the walls thereof set up, by this means thou shalt have no portion on this side the river. Then sent the king to answer unto Rehum the chancellor, and to Shimshai the scribe, and to the rest of their companions that dwell in Samaria, and unto the rest beyond the river, peace, and at such a time. The letter which he sent unto us hath been plainly read before me, and I commanded, and search hath been made, and it is found that this city of old time hath made insurrection against kings, and that rebellion and sedition have been made therein. There have been mighty kings also over Jerusalem, which have ruled over all countries beyond the river, and toll, tribute, and custom was paid unto them. Give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease, and that this city be not builded, until another commandment shall be given from you. Take heed now that ye fail not to do this. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the kings? And when the copy of the king Artaxerxes, that is false Smyrna's letter, was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem unto the Jews, and made them cease by force and power. Then ceased the work of the house of God which is at Jerusalem. So it ceased unto the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So it's not going to be until the second year that we're going to have them start to rebuild. So that's going to be 520 that they're going to commence rebuilding, and it's going to happen gradually. Now, so here, this records that they would have looked at would be the records in Babylon itself, it seems, because that's where you have the Babylonian Chronicles, whether they, there was copies of that, but they're going to see about the fact why Jerusalem was destroyed. So this is kind of a surface search. They're just going to find, what you guys are saying is true. There's this, record that Jerusalem was destroyed for a reason. Okay. Then the prophets Haggai and the prophet Zechariah the son of Iddo prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, even unto them. Then rose up Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Jozadak, and began to build the house of God, which is at Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them. Now, of course, we have a number of problems when people try to, and it's really interesting how some people reconstruct this history from the Bible when they're not actually looking at real history. They're just taking the Bible and trying to fit it together. Now, so we know that Zerubbabel is going to be under Cyrus's decree, right? He's going to return, and Yeshua, right? Now, we also know that Zerubbabel is going to be there, 20 years later when the temple is finished, right? So he's here again. Now, if you had the temple finished after Artaxerxes' second decree, or even his first decree, you would have Zerubbabel being very, very old. If you're going to have Darius, not Darius Hystaspes, but Darius, who's after Artaxerxes the Great, then you would be looking at 408 So you're going to be looking at, from when they leave in 536 to 408, it's like 120 years later. So there ends up being all of these problems that arise when people do this, right? Okay. Now, this word tatane, which means gift, is the last word in the Strong's Hebrew dictionary. Anyway, so we got Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Yeshua the son of Josadak, and began to build the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them. At the same time came to them Tatnai, or Tatnaiah, governor on this side of the river, and Shethar-boznaiah, and their companions, and said thus unto them, Who hath commanded you to build this house and make up this wall? Now, is there any significance in the fact that this Tatnai, or I don't know you say his name, Tatnai, I guess is how you would say it. Is there any significance that it's the last word in the Hebrew dictionary, of Strong's dictionary? Or is that just a curiosity? It's also got the numbers of 8647, and just the 4 and the 7 are switched around. But anyway, think about that. and we got this guy with this name, Shethar-boznai. So it's really a compound name. Shethar is, it says here, it means, well, Boznai, star of splendor. So the Shethar would be a star. Let's see what they have here. So foreign derivation, obviously it's Persian. And they said thus unto them, Who hath commanded you to build this house and make up this wall? And they then said we unto them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building? And the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease till the matter came to Darius. And then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter. Okay, so how do we understand this sentence? So these guys come and say, Who's commanded you to build this house and make up this wall? And then we said unto them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building? But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease. So I don't quite understand 5 verse 4. What is the sense here in this question? We asked their names also to certify thee, that we might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. So in Ezra 5:10. Okay, so they say, okay, that we're just not reading the verse correctly. That the answer of the Jews, it is most evident that this is the answer of the Jews to the inquiry of Tatnai. And the verse should be read thus. Then said we unto them after this manner, These are the names of the men who make this building. Instead of, what are the names of the men who make this building? Instead of being a question, it should be a statement. These are the names. So it can mean who or what. So this is generally an interrogative. So it could be almost, I'm not sure. It doesn't make much sense unless it's meant sarcastically or rhetorically. I'll have to think about that. Okay. So the copy of the letter that Tatnai, governor on this side, and Sheth-Bozona and his companions, and the Pharsakites, which were on this side, sent unto Darius the king. They sent a letter unto him wherein was written thus, Unto Darius the king, all peace. Be it known unto the king that we went into the province of Judea to the house of the great God, which is builded with great stones, and timber is laid in the walls, and this work goeth fast and prospereth in their hands. Now, one is there's quite a bit of difference between the complaint that was made to Paul Smyrtus and this complaint to Darius. So in that one, it just talks about how they're really, really bad people. Here it's going to talk about the building itself. And then asked we those elders and said unto them, Who commanded you to build this house and make up these walls. We asked their names also to certify them. We might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. Right? So they're going to write the names of these people. So that relates to verse 4. And thus they returned us answer, saying, we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and build the house that was builded these many years ago, which the great king of Israel builded and set up. But after that our fathers had provoked the God of heaven unto wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away into Babylon. But in the first year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same king, Cyrus, made a decree to build this house of God. Right? So again, in Ezra, he's consistent with the first year of being, and here he calls him the king of Babylon. Right? The same king, Cyrus, made a decree to build this house of God. And the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, and brought them into the temple of Babylon. Those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he made governor, and said unto him, take these vessels, go carry them into the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be built in this place. Then came the same Sheshbazzar, and laid the foundation of the house of God, which is in Jerusalem. And since that time, even until now, hath it been in building, and yet it is not finished. Now therefore, if it seemed good to the king, let there be search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter. Okay, and then, so Angela is asking, who is Sheshbazzar? Yeah, so I thought he was Jehoiachin's related to the royal family. But I'm going to have to look up that question to try to get the answer to that. Okay, so we can see there's quite a bit of difference anyway. We'll come back to this tomorrow, but we'll see that there's quite a bit of difference between how the complaint was made and also the response of the people. So here they're going to give this history of why their temple was destroyed, why they're rebuilding it, and that Cyrus had made this decree. So now they're not looking in the records just to see whether Jerusalem was bad or not. These people, when they present this complaint to Darius, it's going to be framed as they're saying that there's this Cyrus gave a decree for them to finish this house. Now, it's the law of the Medes and the Persians. It can't be broken, right? Now, of course, we know that the house was ceased building because of false Smyrtus, and he qualified it unless a decree comes from me to change it. But he really didn't have the right to stop the house from being built, right, under the laws of the Medes or the Persians. So you can see this is really a legal matter that's being addressed. Okay, so any other thoughts on this? I've just got a little bit of time. I'm just going to look up Sheshbazzar again. We get this Sheshbazzar. So it says, if I click on this here, yeah, so Sheshbazzar was the son of King Jehoiachin. That's what I'm reading in this other spot, but it's possible or it's likely or highly probable. Okay, if there's no other thoughts, questions, we can close with prayer. Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you again for the studies and for each person. May you bless them and watch over them. May you help each of us as we contemplate these things, as we sort through this chronology in our minds and these stories, that you can help us understand their significance for us today. And I pray that you can bring us together again to study these things. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.